Recently, I made two videos covering the new 57 ppd optical engine as well as the now confirmed 53 ppd Micro-OLED optical engine for the Crystal Super. Both of these new modules allow for a higher pixel per degree value, giving you an even higher level of sharpness, clarity, and overall visual image quality in VR. But I quickly realized that these new modules provide not only higher visual quality, but also noticeably better performance in literally any game or simulator you play. I have done a few simple benchmarks running DCS World comparing the performance or the frame rate between Crystal Super with standard 50 ppd module versus the 57 ppd and the 53 Micro-OLED optical engine. As a bonus, I also added the results from the Crystal Light headset and the original Crystal. To keep it simple and being fair to all headsets, I have decided to run all benchmarks using the same settings in Pimax Play. I set render quality or image quality to 1.0 in Pimax Play, which usually provides the best image with all Pimax headsets without completely killing the frame rate. In most cases, going higher than 1.0 is really not necessary anyway. To make it fair for the Crystal Light to be included in this lineup, no eye tracking will be used in these tests. We are going to use quad views with DCS, but only with fixed foveated rendering. For this to work and meanwhile show you the real-time frame rates, I had to use Pimax XR as the OpenXR runtime coupled with OpenXR toolkit plus all the extra add-ons required to enable quad views in DCS. In Quad Views Companion, I use the following custom settings, and I will show you the benchmarks with both 150 and 200% foveated resolution. This basically means 150% or 200% super sampling of the native resolution only in the center part of the view, of course, since we only do FFR here, while the peripheral view runs at a much lower resolution, which is the whole point of foveated rendering. The only difference in settings between all headsets is that I decided to let Crystal and Crystal Light run at its highest refresh rate, 120 Hz, while all the Crystal Super optical modules or engines can do 90 Hz at max. I did all the tests with my RTX 4090 paired with my kind of outdated Ryzen 5950X CPU. Yeah, I know, but I got kids and they're expensive enough, so my rig has not been updated for the past 3 years or so. Anyway, it runs with 32 GB of RAM, Windows 11, latest 25H2 update and recent Nvidia drivers. Bear in mind, I am screen recording the benchmarks, which kills the frame rate between 3 and 5 frames per second on average. Here are the settings in DCS World. I know this part can be tweaked a lot, but these are the settings I mostly run when I showcase Pimax headsets at events and roadshows. It makes DCS World to look super sharp while still maintaining a pretty good frame rate. To not stress the CPU too much, I did all tests just flying a free flight without other aircrafts, flying my favorite FA-18 Hornet over Nevada. So let's get into it with the Crystal Super 50 ppd. Pimax Play at 1.0, quad views FFR and 150% foveated area resolution. The average frame rate here was around 70 frames per second. Without recording, around 75 maybe. Remember, we're running at a very high resolution here. Center part of the image is super sharp thanks to the 150% quad views, and the visuals are very impressive according to the majority of people that try this on our roadshows and events. Now, switching to 200% foveated area resolution in quad views and restarting the simulator, frame rate drops down to an average of 60 frames per second. Not that impressive numbers, but yeah, we're running overkill foveated resolution at this point. To reach 90 frames per second here with the 50 ppd module, I would need to lower the foveated area resolution to 120% or even less. It would still look very sharp, but not as crisp as it does with 150 or 200%. The field of view rendered here is at 126 degrees horizontally, at least according to my tests. Now let's check out the Crystal Super 57 ppd optical engine running the identical settings and quad views companion at 150% to start with. Frame rate here is basically locked at 90 frames per second now. It's totally smooth. The sharpness and clarity are noticeably higher compared to the 50 ppd, while we can fly at full frame rate or basically 20 frames per second more. That's roughly 30% higher frame rate. Here, the field of view is of course lower, between 102 and 104 degrees horizontally, at least for me. Let's bump up the quad views to 200% now and do the same test again. Now we're averaging 87 frames per second, an almost completely smooth flight. The clarity here is just incredible. The 57 ppd is, in my opinion, the sharpest optical engine for the Crystal Super, and it looks amazingly sharp here in the center part of the view especially. So from 60 frames per second with the 50 ppd to 87 frames per second here, just by switching the module, that's almost 50% more frames per second. Plus now we also got more clarity and a higher ppd, of course. Next up, let's switch to the Crystal Super 53 ppd Micro-OLED optical engine and start off with the quad views at 150% like previously. Note that I have to use a different Pimax Play version here that has Micro-OLED support, but settings-wise it's identical to the previous Pimax Play version. Well, what can I say? We see a locked 90 frames per second frame rate most of the time, just like with the 57 ppd module. Here the image is almost as sharp as the 57 ppd, but like I mentioned earlier, the Micro-OLED panels render an incredibly sharp, crisp and beautiful image with better contrast levels and better blacks, of course, better than any QLED headset or module can do. Also, it all just feels smoother here, probably because the Micro-OLED panels have a significantly lower latency and faster response times than QLED panels. Now let's dial in quad views at 200% with the Micro-OLED module. We are getting mostly around 86 to 87 frames per second on average. Almost identical performance to what 57 ppd module was delivering, and again almost 50% better performance compared to the standard 50 ppd optical engine for Crystal Super. And through the lenses the clarity is even higher now, with almost no jagged edges at all, simply a photorealistic VR experience, including fantastic contrast and black levels. And remember, this Micro-OLED is running with a field of view of 116 degrees horizontally, only 10 degrees less than the 50 ppd field of view of 126 degrees. So between these three optical engines for the Super, the two winners are obviously the 57 ppd module and the 53 Micro-OLED optical engine, both in terms of performance and visual clarity and sharpness, where 57 ppd takes the edge in terms of clarity, at least if you ask me. Next up, let's fire up the Crystal Light. Identical settings in Pimax Play and quad views FFR dialed back to 150% again. No other settings has been changed. Note that the headset runs in 120 Hz, so we can actually determine the maximum frame rate we can squeeze out here. Interestingly, Crystal Light renders on average 95 frames per second here. I'm not able to determine if this is actually higher or lower than what the 57 ppd and the Micro-OLED can do, since Crystal Super is capped at 90 Hz or 90 frames per second, but this result shows you that the Crystal Light will in fact barely give you any higher frame rate running games with the same settings. And obviously, the image quality here is not nearly as sharp with the Crystal Light. It's lacking the extra clarity since QLED panels are 2880 by 2880 pixels per eye, while the Super with any QLED optical engine has a resolution of 3840 by 3840, and the Micro-OLED optical engine is 3840 by 3552 pixels per eye. And my crystal light field of view is around 105 degrees horizontally. Increasing the quad views to 200% makes the crystal light to struggle a bit more. The average frame rate is now 85 frames per second. This is actually lower than with both the 57 ppd and the Micro-OLED module, using identical settings. And despite running 200% quad views foveated area, the image crystal light renders is far from what the 57 ppd and the Micro-OLED offers. Here, the lower physical panel resolution is clearly a factor that makes a big difference. Lastly, let's try all this with the original crystal, with the same settings of course, by first changing quad views back to 150%. For some reason, the original crystal delivers a better frame rate than my crystal light, despite running the same resolution. Both the rendered resolution and the physical panel resolution is the same. With the crystal here, we are achieving 117 frames per second on average. Image sharpness and clarity is basically identical to crystal light, but the frame rate is considerably higher. I guess that this is because quad views has been previously very optimized for the Pimax Crystal. At least that's my theory here. I did the test several times with almost the identical results. Again, the image clarity and the sharpness do not even get close to what the Crystal Super delivers, but sure, it's a great looking image after all, especially compared to all the other mainstream VR headsets out there. At quad views 200%, the frame rate was a bit lower, but not by much really. On average, I saw 110 to 112 frames per second in this test, sometimes hitting 118. This is weird, and I don't really know why Crystal provides a better frame rate than the Crystal Light here, but again, I do suspect it must have something to do with better quad view support running Pimax XR as OpenXR runtime. So, how can Crystal Super, with these two new optical engines or modules, all of a sudden display an even better looking VR image, having more sharpness and clarity, while giving you higher frame rates than the standard 50 ppd module? And on top of that, it provides an almost identical frame rate to Crystal Light. Well, this is actually because of the rendered resolution in the pipeline. We ran all tests at Pimax Play image quality at 1.0, which is optimal for all the headsets, but that doesn't mean that we are rendering the same resolution. In fact, the 57 ppd and the 53 ppd Micro-OLED are rendering a lower resolution than the Crystal Light and the original Crystal. Both the 57 ppd and the Micro-OLED module have better distortion profiles, requiring much less additional pixels to be rendered to compensate for potential image distortions. Sure, both modules also have a more narrow field of view than the 50 ppd module, so that is also a factor. You can do your own math here, but for instance, the 50 ppd module needs to render almost 45% more pixels in total than the 53 ppd Micro-OLED to achieve that optimal image quality and clarity in VR. But on the other hand, the Super Micro-OLED optical engine has a roughly 10 degrees wider field of view than both the Crystal and the Crystal Light. And they all render roughly the same number of pixels in total at Pimax Play 1.0 with very similar rendered resolutions per eye. Again, I touched this topic in my last two videos, and the benchmarks here proves the fact that you do not need a better GPU if you upgrade from a Crystal Light, the original Crystal, or from the 50 ppd Crystal Super to the 57 or the Micro-OLED module. Potentially, you can get better performance even, depending on what you play. And the same goes for the upcoming Dream Air, that in fact renders an even lower resolution than the Super Micro-OLED at Pimax Play image quality 1.0, but that's something for another video coming up. Guys, let me know what you think of these benchmark results, and also feel free to check out VR Flight Sim Guy on YouTube. Steve has been making a lot of videos about the 57 ppd module, and I've noticed that he also loves not only the improved quality but also the performance in flight simulators running the 57 ppd instead of the 50 ppd engine. For now, That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.